The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the tall windows of the Vienna Academy of Music when little Maya Chen and her mother arrived at the front gates. Maya clutched her mother's hand tightly, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders with each step. Inside that backpack was nothing more than a water bottle and a hair tie. She didn't bring any sheet music. She never needed to. The building itself was intimidating. It stood like a palace from another era, with its grand stone columns and heavy wooden doors that seemed designed for giants, not 8-year-old children. Other families were arriving too, teenagers mostly, carrying leather folders filled with their carefully practiced pieces. They looked polished and professional. Maya looked like she'd just walked out of a regular elementary school classroom, which she had. Her mother bent down and straightened Maya's collar for the 3rd time that morning. "Remember, sweetheart, just do your best. That's all anyone can ask." There was worry in her voice, the kind that comes from a parent who knows the world doesn't always make space for dreams, especially when money is tight and opportunities are rare. This audition had cost them everything they'd saved for 6 months. The plane tickets alone had been a sacrifice. Inside, the halls were even more impressive. Oil paintings of famous composers lined the walls, their stern faces seeming to judge everyone who passed by. The floors were made of marble that echoed with every footstep. Maya had never been in a building this fancy. Back home, she practiced on a beat-up keyboard her grandmother had found at a yard sale for $15. Half the keys stuck, and it didn't even have proper weighted keys like a real piano, but it was hers, and she'd spent thousands of hours on it. They were directed to a waiting area outside the main audition hall. About a dozen other families sat on the wooden benches, and Maya immediately noticed she was the youngest person there by at least 4 years. A teenage boy was doing finger exercises in the air, his eyes closed in concentration. A girl who looked about 16 was reviewing sheet music, her lips moving silently as she read. Everyone seemed so prepared, so serious. Maya's mother filled out the final paperwork while Maya swung her legs back and forth on the bench, too short to reach the ground. An older woman sitting nearby smiled at her. "First audition, dear?" she asked kindly. Maya nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, aren't you brave? I remember when my daughter was your age. We didn't even think about academies like this until she was much older." The woman looked at Maya with a mixture of admiration and concern, the way adults often look at children attempting something they considered too difficult. One by one, names were called. Each student would disappear through the massive double doors of the audition hall, and 30 minutes later, they'd emerge looking either relieved or devastated. The teenage boy came out with red eyes, clearly holding back tears. The 16-year-old girl came out smiling slightly, which her parents took as a good sign. Then finally, a stern-looking woman in a black suit appeared at the doorway with a clipboard. "Maya Chen," she called out, mispronouncing the last name slightly. Maya's mother squeezed her hand. "You've got this, baby. Just play like you do at home." The audition hall was enormous. The ceiling stretched up so high that Maya had to tilt her head all the way back to see it. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, and the walls were covered in deep red fabric that seemed to absorb sound. In the center of the room sat a magnificent grand piano, its black surface so perfectly polished that Maya could see the reflection of the chandeliers in it. This wasn't like her keyboard at home. This was the real thing, the kind of instrument she'd only ever seen in videos online. At the far end of the hall, behind a long wooden table, sat 3 people. They looked important and serious, the kind of adults who'd spent their entire lives around music and probably had very high standards. The man in the middle appeared to be the oldest, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. To his left sat a woman with sharp features and blonde hair pulled back so tightly it made her face look severe. The third judge, another man, younger than the others, was leafing through papers and barely looked up when Maya entered. "Good morning," said the older man in the center. His accent was thick, his English careful and measured. "You are Maya Chen, correct? Age 8? "Yes, sir," Maya replied, her voice sounding so small in the huge space. The judges exchanged glances. The blonde woman raised an eyebrow. 8 years old, she repeated, as if confirming something she found difficult to believe. "And you are here to audition for our junior program?" "Yes, ma'am." The older man cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Very well. Let me explain how this will work. You will perform one piece of your choosing, classical repertoire only, After that, we will provide you with a piece to sight read. Do you understand sight reading? Maya nodded. She'd been sight reading since she was 5, teaching herself from free sheet music she found online. Excellent. Please take your position at the piano. Whenever you are ready, you may begin with your prepared piece. Maya walked to the piano bench. It was too low for her, and she had to climb up onto it rather than sit down gracefully like the older students probably did. She could feel the judges watching her, could sense their skepticism. They'd probably seen 100 talented kids. What could an 8-year-old possibly show them that they hadn't seen before? She placed her hands on the keys, and immediately, everything else disappeared. The grand hall, the watching judges, the pressure, her mother waiting outside. None of it mattered anymore. There was only the music. She'd chosen to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece most piano teachers wouldn't assign to students until they were well into their teenage years. It required not just technical skill but emotional maturity, the ability to make the piano sing rather than just play notes. When she began, she didn't think about her fingers or the keys or the technique. She just let the music flow through her the way it always did, natural as breathing. The melody filled the enormous hall, each note clear and purposeful. Her small hands stretched to reach the intervals, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. She wasn't performing. She was simply being herself, and herself was someone who spoke through music better than through words. The piece lasted about 4 minutes, though Maya lost all sense of time while playing. When she finished, she looked up at the judges, waiting for their response. The silence in the room felt heavy. The older man was leaning forward in his chair, his expression unreadable. The blonde woman had put down her pen and was staring at Maya with narrowed eyes, as if trying to figure out a puzzle. The younger judge had finally looked up from his papers, his mouth slightly open. That was... The older man began, then paused, searching for words. That was quite good. Quite good indeed, especially for someone your age. The blonde woman leaned over and whispered something to him. He nodded, then whispered back. The younger judge joined their quiet conversation. Maya sat on the bench, her legs dangling, watching them discuss something she couldn't hear. She wondered if she'd done something wrong. Maybe she'd played too fast or too slow, or maybe she'd missed something important. After what felt like forever, the older man looked at her again. Miss Chen, we are now going to proceed with the sight reading portion. This is where we will give you a piece you have never seen before, and you will attempt to play it. Maya nodded, expecting them to hand her something simple, maybe a beginner's exercise or a basic melody. That's what sight reading tests usually were. But then the blonde woman did something unexpected. She reached into a leather portfolio beside her chair and pulled out an old yellowed piece of sheet music. She said something in German to the other judges, and whatever she said made them both look surprised. The older man protested slightly, but the woman was insistent, her voice sharp and determined. Finally, he sighed and nodded. Very well, he said, though he didn't sound happy about it. The blonde woman stood up and walked toward the piano, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She placed the sheet music on the piano stand in front of Maya, and what Maya saw there made her eyes widen. This wasn't a simple piece. This was chaos on paper. The sheet music in front of Maya looked like someone had thrown random notes onto a page and called it a composition. There were notes stacked on top of each other in strange clusters, time signatures that changed every few measures, and hand positions that seemed to require fingers to be in 2 places at once. At the top of the page, written in elegant script, were the words "Fragments of Chaos" and a composer name she didn't recognize. Maya stared at it, her mind already beginning to process the patterns. It was complicated, yes, but there was logic hidden in the chaos. There always was if you looked carefully enough. The blonde woman returned to her seat, a small, satisfied smile on her face. She said something in German to the other judges, and the older man's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like disapproval. Miss Chen, he said, his voice gentler now, almost apologetic, I must be honest with you. My colleague has selected a piece that is far beyond what we would typically use for sight reading, even for our advanced students. This is a contemporary work, quite experimental, and very difficult. He paused, glancing at the blonde woman, who sat with her arms crossed, watching Maya with calculating eyes. In fact, he continued, this piece is so challenging that I think it would be unfair to ask you to attempt it without first demonstrating what you would be facing. Would you permit us to try it ourselves? Maya nodded, confused but curious. She climbed down from the bench and stood to the side. This had never happened before. Teachers didn't usually play for students. It was always the other way around. The older man stood up and walked to the piano with the careful steps of someone whose knees hurt after sitting too long. He settled onto the bench, adjusted his position, and studied the sheet music for a long moment. Then he placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. Right away, Maya could hear the difficulty. The opening required both hands to play completely different rhythms at the same time, something musicians called polyrhythm. The left hand was playing in groups of 3, while the right hand played in groups of 4. It was like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach, except 100 times more complicated. The man made it through about 15 seconds before his hands stumbled over each other. He tried to recover, pushing forward to a section where the key suddenly shifted from C major to something minor and strange. His fingers fumbled again, hitting wrong notes. After 30 seconds, he stopped completely, shaking his head. "As you can see," he said, a bit embarrassed, "this is not a simple piece." He returned to his seat, and the younger male judge let out a small laugh. "I'm not even going to try," he said in English. "I know my limitations," but the blonde woman stood up. "I will," she announced. There was pride in her voice, like she had something to prove. She walked to the piano with confident strides and sat down without any hesitation. Her hands moved to the keys and she started playing. She was better than the older man, that much was clear. Her fingers were faster, more precise. She made it past the section that had defeated him and pushed into new territory, where the notes seemed to scatter across the entire keyboard like birds taking flight. But then came a passage that required the hands to cross over each other rapidly, the right hand playing bass notes while the left hand reached up for the treble. The coordination required was immense. The woman's face tightened with concentration. Her hands moved, crossed, reached, but then tangled together. A harsh, discordant sound came from the piano as she hit several wrong notes at once. She stopped, her jaw clenched. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the sheet music like it had personally offended her. Then she stood up and walked back to the judge's table without a word, though her cheeks were slightly flushed. The room fell into an awkward silence. These were master pianists, people who had spent their entire lives studying music, teaching at one of the most prestigious academies in Europe, and a single piece had defeated both of them within the first minute. The older man cleared his throat. "Well," he said, trying to maintain his dignity, "I think we have sufficiently demonstrated that this piece is inappropriate for a sight reading test, particularly for someone of Miss Chen's age." He looked at the blonde woman with mild reproach. "Perhaps we should select something more reasonable." But Maya wasn't listening anymore. While they talked, her eyes had been scanning the sheet music still sitting on the piano stand. The notes were arranging themselves in her mind, forming patterns, creating pathways. She could hear it now, not just see it. The melody was there, hiding underneath all the complexity. It was actually quite beautiful in a wild, untamed sort of way. Without thinking about it, she walked back to the piano. "Miss Chen," the older man called out, "there's no need. We will find you a different piece." But Maya was already climbing back onto the bench. Her hands found their positions on the keys. The judge's conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Child, really, this isn't necessary." The older man tried again, his voice kind but firm. "This piece is too advanced. Even professional pianists struggle with it." Maya looked at them, her dark eyes serious. "Can I try?" she asked simply. The 3 judges exchanged glances. The blonde woman leaned forward, suddenly very interested. The younger man shrugged as if to say, "Why not?" The older man sighed, looking torn between protecting this small child from failure and curiosity about what would happen. "Very well," he said finally. "But please don't feel bad if you cannot play it. As you have seen, none of us could manage it either." Maya turned back to the piano. She took one more look at the sheet music, letting her eyes trace the path of the notes one final time. Then she closed her eyes for just a second, took a breath, and began to play. The opening notes rang out, crisp and clean. Her left hand started the polyrhythm pattern, groups of 3, steady as a heartbeat. Then her right hand joined in, groups of 4, weaving in and out of the left hand's rhythm like 2 dancers who knew each other's steps perfectly. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. The 2 rhythms that had tangled the older man's fingers flowed from Maya's hands as naturally as water. She pushed forward into the key change, her fingers adapting instantly to the shift from major to minor. Where the older man had stumbled, she glided through. The notes came faster now, requiring her small hands to stretch wider than seemed comfortable, but she managed it. Her body swayed slightly with the music, helping her maintain balance as her hands moved across the keyboard. Then came the hand-crossing section, the part that had defeated the blonde woman. Maya's right hand swept down to the lower register while her left hand shot upward. They passed each other in the air, each landing exactly where it needed to be. Once, twice, 3 times they crossed, the notes tumbling out in a cascade of sound that filled the enormous hall. Behind her, she didn't see the older man slowly rise from his chair, his hand covering his mouth. She didn't see the blonde woman's eyes widen, her earlier smugness replaced by something that looked almost like shock. She didn't see the younger judge lean forward so far he nearly fell out of his seat. Maya was somewhere else entirely. She was inside the music, riding its waves, feeling its chaos and its order all at once. Her fingers knew where to go, not because she was reading the notes anymore, but because the music was telling her. It was like a conversation, and the piano was speaking back to her, guiding her through the complexity. The piece demanded more. A sudden shift in tempo, from fast to painfully slow, then back to fast again. Notes that had to be held with one finger while others played around them. Dynamics that swung from whisper-soft to thunderously loud within the space of a single measure. Every challenge the composer had written into the piece, every trick designed to trip up even experienced pianists, Maya navigated with the kind of ease that shouldn't have been possible. In the back of the hall, the door cracked open slightly. Maya's mother had heard the music and couldn't resist peeking in, even though parents weren't supposed to enter during auditions. What she saw made her heart stop. Her little girl, the one who'd learned to play on a broken keyboard in their small apartment, was performing something that sounded like it belonged in a concert hall. Not an audition room, the music built toward its climax. The composer's chaos becoming more intense, more demanding. Maya's hands flew across the keys, her small fingers somehow reaching every note, executing every impossible combination. The chandelier overhead seemed to tremble with the vibration of sound, and then as suddenly as it had begun, the piece ended. A final jarring chord, held for exactly the right amount of time before being released into silence. Maya lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She turned on the bench to face the judges, her legs dangling above the floor just like before, as if nothing unusual had just happened. The 3 judges sat frozen at their table. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. The silence stretched on for so long that Maya began to worry she'd done something terribly wrong. "Was that okay?" she asked, her small voice barely audible in the vast space. The silence in the audition hall felt like it was pressing down on Maya from all sides. She sat on the piano bench, waiting for someone to say something, anything. Had she played it wrong? Maybe she'd missed notes that she didn't realize were there. Maybe the judges were trying to figure out how to tell an 8-year-old that she'd failed. Then she saw something that confused her even more. The older man, the one with the wire-rimmed glasses, had tears in his eyes. Actual tears. He was blinking rapidly, trying to hide them, but they were there. Maya had never seen a grown man cry before. At least not like this. Not over music. The blonde woman was gripping the edge of the table so hard that her knuckles had turned white. Her mouth was slightly open, and she seemed to have forgotten how to close it. She looked like someone who'd just watched something impossible happen right in front of her eyes. The younger judge had both hands on top of his head, his fingers tangled in his hair. He was staring at Maya like she was some kind of puzzle he couldn't solve. Finally, the older man found his voice. It came out rough and shaky. "Child," he said, and had to stop to clear his throat. "Child, where did you learn to play like that?" Maya shrugged, a gesture so normal and childlike that it seemed completely out of place after what had just happened. "I don't know," she said honestly. I hear it. The music tells me where to go." "The music tells you," the blonde woman repeated slowly, as if testing whether the words made sense when she said them out loud. "They didn't seem to." "Have you studied at a conservatory?" the younger judge asked. "Private lessons with a master teacher? Some kind of special program?" Maya shook her head. "No, sir. I've never had a real lesson." The 3 judges looked at each other. The older man leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. When he put the glasses back on, he looked at Maya with an expression that was hard to read. It wasn't quite disbelief, but it was close. "Never had a lesson," he repeated quietly. "How is that possible?" Maya felt embarrassed now. Like maybe she should have had lessons, like not having them meant something was wrong with her. My family can't afford a teacher, she explained, her voice getting smaller. We tried to find one, but lessons are really expensive. So I just watch videos online and try to copy what they do. And I got a keyboard from my grandmother. It's old and some of the keys stick, but it works. The blonde woman stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked toward the piano, toward Maya, her heels clicking with each step. Maya tensed, worried she was in trouble. But when the woman reached her, she didn't look angry. She looked stunned. "Do you have perfect pitch?" she asked. Maya didn't know what that meant. "I don't know what that is," she admitted. The woman walked to the piano and pressed a single key without looking at it. "What note is this?" Maya listened. F sharp. The woman pressed another key. "And this?" B flat. The woman played a complex chord, 5 notes at once. "This?" Maya named each note in the chord from lowest to highest. The woman played 3 more random combinations, and Maya identified each one instantly, without hesitation. "Unglaublich," the woman whispered, which Maya later learned meant unbelievable in German. The woman returned to her seat, but she didn't sit down. She just stood there, one hand pressed against her forehead like she had a headache. The older man was writing something furiously on a piece of paper. He wrote for nearly a minute straight, his pen moving so fast it made scratching sounds. Then he looked up at Maya again. "Miss Chen, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Did you know that piece before today? Had you perhaps seen it online, practiced it at home?" "No, sir," Maya said. "I'd never seen it before. I didn't even know what it was called until I read the name at the top." "And you played it from sight," he said, not really asking, just stating the fact out loud as if hearing it might make it more believable. "You looked at it for perhaps 2 minutes while we attempted it, and then you played it. The entire thing. Perfectly." Maya wasn't sure if that was a question, so she just nodded. The man set down his pen and folded his hands on the table. "In my 40 years of teaching music, of sitting on audition panels, of working with prodigies from around the world, I have never witnessed anything like what you just did. Never. Is that good?" Maya asked, because she genuinely didn't know if she'd impressed them or somehow broken a rule she wasn't aware of. The younger judge let out a laugh that sounded almost hysterical. "Is that good?" he repeated. "Is that? Oh my God, is that good?" He laughed again, shaking his head. The door at the back of the hall opened wider and Maya's mother stepped inside, unable to stay away any longer. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I heard the music and I just—" She trailed off, looking at the judges nervously. The older man waved his hand. "It's quite all right. Please come in. You should be here for this." Maya's mother walked forward slowly, her shoes making soft sounds on the marble floor. She stood behind Maya, placing her hands gently on her daughter's shoulders. "Did she do okay?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer was more complicated than okay. "Madam," the older man said, standing up out of respect, "your daughter has just performed a piece that defeated 2 master pianists. She sight-read it, meaning she had never seen it before, and she executed it flawlessly. Not just competently, not just well, flawlessly." Maya's mother's hands tightened on Maya's shoulders. "I don't understand," she said. Is that normal?" The blonde woman finally spoke again. "No," she said flatly. "It is not normal. It is in fact impossible. Except we all just watched it happen." The older man sat back down and looked at the papers in front of him, then at his colleagues, then back at Maya. "We need to have a discussion," he said. "Miss Chen and Mrs. Chen, would you please wait outside for a few moments? We will call you back in shortly." Maya climbed down from the piano bench and her mother took her hand. They walked back toward the door together. As they left, Maya glanced over her shoulder one last time and saw the 3 judges huddled together, talking in urgent whispers. The blonde woman was gesturing dramatically with her hands. The younger judge was nodding enthusiastically. The older man was writing again. In the waiting area outside, Maya's mother pulled her daughter close. "What happened in there?" she whispered. "I heard you playing and it sounded— I've never heard you play anything like that before." "They gave me a really hard song," Maya explained. "They tried to play it first but couldn't do it. So I tried." "And you could play it?" "Yeah," Maya said simply. "It wasn't as hard as it looked. Once you understand the pattern, it makes sense." Her mother looked at her with an expression that was part pride, part confusion, part something Maya couldn't identify. "Sometimes I forget how special you are," she said softly. "And then something like this happens, and I remember that I don't even fully understand what you can do." They didn't have to wait long. Maybe 5 minutes passed before the stern woman in the black suit appeared at the door again. "The judges would like to see you now," she said. But this time her voice was different, respectful, almost reverent. Maya and her mother walked back into the audition hall together. The 3 judges were standing this time, not sitting. All of them were on their feet, which seemed significant somehow. The older man stepped forward. He was smiling now, a genuine warm smile that made his whole face look different. "Miss Chen," he began, and his voice was steady now, controlled, though Maya could still see emotion behind his eyes. "The panel has reached a unanimous decision regarding your audition." Maya held her breath. Her mother's hand tightened around hers. "It is the opinion of this committee that you possess a level of musical talent that we encounter perhaps once in a generation, if we are fortunate. Your technical ability is extraordinary, your musicality is beyond your years, and your capacity for sight reading is, quite frankly, something I have never seen before and may never see again." He paused, and the pause felt enormous. "Therefore, we would like to offer you immediate acceptance into the Vienna Academy of Music, with a full scholarship covering tuition, materials, and access to our facilities. Additionally, I would like to personally offer my services as your primary instructor." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Maya heard her mother gasp beside her, felt her hand squeeze so tight it almost hurt. But Maya just stood there trying to process what she'd just heard. "Do you understand what this means?" the older man asked gently. Maya nodded slowly. "I get to study here? For real?" "For real," he confirmed. "If you want to, and someone will teach me? Real lessons?" "I will teach you myself," he said. "It would be my honor." Maya looked up at her mother, whose face was wet with tears now. Then she looked back at the judges, at these important people who had just watched her play and somehow seen something worth believing in. "Yes," she said, her voice small but certain. "Yes, I want to." The blonde woman smiled for the first time since Maya had entered the room. "Then welcome to the academy. Miss Chen, I think you are going to change everything we thought we knew about music." What happened in the weeks after Maya's audition felt like living in a dream that refused to end. Her mother had to fill out mountains of paperwork for the scholarship. They had to figure out housing in Vienna, which turned out to be part of the academy's program. They provided a small apartment for scholarship students and their families, nothing fancy, but it had a real piano in the living room. A real piano. Not a keyboard with sticky keys, but an actual upright piano that had been tuned and maintained and sounded like heaven when Maya touched it. The older judge, whose name was Professor Wilhelm Hartmann, visited their apartment on their 3rd day in Vienna. He came bearing gifts, a stack of sheet music that he said were pieces Maya should begin learning. But when he sat down on their worn couch and actually looked at Maya, really looked at her, he seemed to be studying something he still didn't quite understand. "I need to be honest with you," he told Maya and her mother. "I have been teaching piano for 40 years. I have worked with students who went on to win international competitions, who perform at concert halls around the world. But I have never, in all those years, encountered someone like your daughter." Maya's mother poured tea with shaking hands. They still weren't used to having importa. "At people in their home, treating them like they mattered. What makes her different?" her mother asked. "I mean, I know she's talented, but is it really that unusual?" Professor Hartmann picked up his teacup and stared into it like he might find answers there. "Most prodigies, even the exceptional ones, they have extraordinary technical skill. They can play difficult pieces, they can memorize complex compositions, but it's still learned behavior. You can see the hours of practice in their playing, the careful instruction, the deliberate development of technique." He set down the cup and looked at Maya, who was sitting on the floor by the piano bench. "But your daughter, she doesn't play like she learned it. She plays like music is her native language, like she was born already knowing how to speak it. The way she sight-read that piece at the audition, that's not something you can teach. That's not something that comes from practice. That's something else entirely." "What is it then?" Maya asked, curious about herself in a way she'd never been before. The professor smiled. "I don't know. I've been trying to figure that out. Some people might call it genius. Others might call it a gift from God." Personally, I think you hear music the way most people hear words. It's just natural to you. Over the next few weeks, Professor Hartman began working with Maya 3 times a week. But their lessons were unlike anything he'd done before. He told her mother privately that he wasn't really teaching Maya to play piano. She already knew how to do that better than most professionals. Instead, he was teaching her about music itself. The history, the theory, the stories behind the compositions. He was giving her context for the language she already spoke fluently. But something else was happening too. Something none of them had anticipated. The academy had a policy about recording auditions. Every student who tried out was captured on video for review purposes. It was standard procedure, nothing unusual about it. Those recordings were stored in the academy's private database and weren't supposed to be seen by anyone outside the institution. Except someone leaked Maya's audition video. Nobody ever figured out who did it. Maybe it was another student who worked in the administrative office. Maybe it was a faculty member who thought the world needed to see what they'd witnessed. Either way, 3 weeks after Maya's audition, her video appeared on the internet. The person who posted it wrote a simple description. 8-year-old sight reads impossible piece that defeated master pianists. Watch until the end. For the first day, only a few hundred people watched it. Then a few thousand. Then a popular classical music blog shared it with a headline that read, "Is this child the future of piano?" Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. Maya knew nothing about this. She was busy settling into her new life, practicing on her real piano, exploring Vienna with her mother, trying to make friends with the other students at the academy who were all much older than her. She was just living her life, unaware that around the world, people were watching her play and arguing in comment sections about whether the video was real or fake. Professor Hartman found out when his phone started ringing nonstop. Other musicians calling him, journalists asking for interviews, concert halls inquiring about Maya's availability. At first, he was angry about the leak. It violated Maya's privacy, put pressure on a child who was still learning to tie her shoes properly. But then he watched the video himself, seeing the audition from an outside perspective for the first time, and he understood why people couldn't stop watching. There was something about seeing Maya's small figure at that grand piano, something about watching her succeed where adults had failed, something about the pure joy on her face while she played. It wasn't just impressive. It was moving. It reminded people why they loved music in the first place. He came to their apartment one evening with his laptop. "I need to show you something," he said, looking worried. He played the video for them, and Maya watched herself on screen with detached curiosity. Was that really what she looked like when she played? Her mother, however, went pale. "How many people have seen this?" she asked. "Last I checked, about 3 million, Professor Hartman said quietly. The number was so large it didn't even make sense. 3 million people. Maya couldn't imagine that many humans in one place. Her mother put her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed. "What does this mean?" she asked. "It means everything is about to change," the professor said. "I've already received 17 interview requests, 12 offers for concert performances, and 5 recording companies asking if Maya has representation." He looked at Maya, his expression serious but kind. "I need to know what you want," he said. "Because this is your life we're talking about. Some child prodigies get pushed into careers they never wanted. They burn out, they grow to hate music, they lose their childhood. I will not let that happen to you. So I'm asking, what do you want?" Maya thought about it. She thought about the keyboard in their old apartment, about the hours she spent playing just because it made her happy. She thought about how music felt like the only thing that ever made complete sense to her. "I just want to play," she said simply. "I like playing. I don't really care if people watch or not." Professor Hartman nodded slowly. "That's a good answer. A healthy answer. But the world doesn't always make it that simple. If we say yes to these opportunities, you'll have responsibilities. Performances where people expect perfection. Interviews where people ask you the same questions over and over. Pressure to always be exceptional." "But will I still get to play?" Maya asked. "Yes, more than ever." "Then it's okay," Maya said. "As long as I can keep playing, the rest doesn't really matter." Her mother wasn't so sure. "She's only 8, she said to Professor Hartman. "Is this too much too soon?" "Possibly," he admitted. "But I've also seen what happens when you try to hide talent like this. The world finds it anyway, and when it does, you have even less control over what happens. At least this way, we can be selective. We can protect her. We can make sure she only does things that feel right. They talked late into the night, discussing possibilities, setting boundaries, trying to figure out how to navigate something none of them had experienced before. They decided to accept one interview with a reputable classical music publication, nothing too overwhelming. They agreed to one small performance at a local venue in Vienna, just to see how Maya handled playing for a real audience. Everything else could wait, but the world had other plans. The video kept spreading. Classical musicians started analyzing it frame by frame, posting their own videos breaking down what made Maya's performance so extraordinary. Music teachers showed it to their students. News outlets picked up the story. Within a month, Maya Chen became a name that people in the classical music world recognized instantly. The local performance they'd planned, at a small concert hall that seated maybe 200 people, sold out in less than an hour. Then the venue called to say they'd had thousands more requests for tickets. They ended up having to move the performance to a larger space, and that sold out too. On the night of the concert, Maya stood backstage in a simple black dress that her mother had bought for the occasion. She could hear the murmur of the crowd beyond the curtain. Hundreds of people, maybe more. They were all there to hear her play. Professor Hartman knelt down beside her. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Maya shook her head. She wasn't nervous. She was excited. This was just a bigger audience than usual, but the piano would be the same. The music would be the same. She would just do what she always did. "Remember," Professor Hartman said gently, "you don't owe these people perfection. You don't owe them genius. You just play the way you play, and that will be more than enough." Maya nodded. She understood. Or at least she thought she did. The stage manager gave the signal. The curtain began to rise. Maya walked out onto the stage, and the applause hit her like a physical force. She'd never heard anything so loud. The lights were bright, making it hard to see individual faces in the crowd. But she could feel them. All those people, all that attention focused on her. She walked to the piano, climbed onto the bench, adjusted her position. The audience fell silent. In that moment, in that perfect silence before the first note, Maya realized something important. This was bigger than she'd thought. This mattered to people in ways she didn't fully understand yet. They hadn't come just to hear music. They'd come to witness something they believed was special. They'd come with expectations, with hopes, with dreams of their own projected onto her small shoulders. For the first time in her life, Maya felt the weight of being called a prodigy, and she wondered if she was ready for it. Maya's hands hovered over the piano keys for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. The silence in the concert hall was complete, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred. She could hear her own breathing, the faint creak of the piano bench, someone coughing quietly in the back row. Then she began to play. She'd chosen Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece that was famous for being both beautiful and technically demanding. Her small hand stretched across the keys, producing sounds that seemed impossible for someone her size to create. The opening chords were dark and powerful, filling the hall with a richness that made people lean forward in their seats. As Maya played, something shifted inside her. The nervousness that had been building, that weight of expectation she'd felt just moments before, it all melted away, because this was what she knew. This was where she belonged. It didn't matter if there were 5 people watching or 500. The piano was the piano and the music was the music, and she was just the person lucky enough to bring the two together. The piece moved through its various moods. From somber to passionate to almost violent in its intensity, Maya's body moved with the music, swaying, leaning in during the soft parts, pulling back during the loud ones. She wasn't performing. She was simply being herself, and herself was someone who lived and breathed music. When the final notes faded into silence, there was a pause, just a heartbeat of absolute quiet. Then the applause erupted, and it was even louder than when she'd walked out. People were standing, and they kept clapping, and some were even shouting. Maya stood up and took a small bow, like Professor Hartman had taught her, then looked to the wings where he was standing. He was smiling, but he also had that look on his face again, that expression of wonder mixed with something that might have been sadness. Later she would understand that look better. He was proud, yes, but he was also watching a childhood potentially slip away, watching a little girl become public property in a way that couldn't be undone. But Maya didn't know any of that yet. She just knew she'd played well and people seemed happy about it. The weeks and months that followed were a blur. More concerts, each one bigger than the last. An appearance on a popular television program, where the host seemed more interested in the fact that she was 8 than in the music she played. Interviews where reporters asked her the same questions over and over. When did you start playing? How many hours do you practice? Do you ever just want to play with toys like other kids? That last question always bothered her because the truth was, she didn't really want to play with toys like other kids. She wanted to play piano. That was her version of play. But people seemed disappointed when she said that. Like she was supposed to be sad about missing out on a normal childhood she'd never wanted in the first place. By the time Maya turned 10, she'd performed at some of the most prestigious concert halls in Europe. She'd released her first album, a collection of classical pieces that music critics praised for its mature interpretation and stunning technical precision. She'd been featured in magazines and news programs. Some people called her the future of classical music. Others worried she was being exploited, pushed too hard too fast. Through it all, Professor Hartman remained her anchor. He made sure she still had time to just be a kid, even if her version of being a kid involved spending hours at a piano. He protected her from the worst of the media attention, turned down offers that felt exploitative, and never let anyone forget that Maya was a person first and a prodigy second. Talent like yours, he told her once during a lesson. It's a gift, but it's also a responsibility. Not to other people, but to yourself. You have the ability to create beauty, to move people, to say things with music that can't be said with words. That's rare and precious. But you also deserve to have a life, to grow up, to make mistakes, to be more than just the girl who can play piano. Maya was 12 when she performed at Carnegie Hall in New York, one of the most famous venues in the world. The concert was sold out months in advance. Critics flew in from around the globe. The pressure was immense, the expectations impossible. Backstage, before she went on, Maya had a moment of doubt. She was older now, more aware of what people expected from her. The word prodigy had started to feel heavy, like a label that defined her more than her actual playing did. What if she made a mistake? What if people were disappointed? What if she wasn't as special as everyone seemed to think? Professor Hartman found her sitting alone in the dressing room, staring at her hands. He was older now, too. His hair completely gray, his movements a bit slower, but his eyes were still sharp, still kind. Having second thoughts? He asked gently. What if I'm not good enough? Maya said quietly. What if everyone's been wrong about me? He sat down beside her. Do you remember that day at the audition? When you played that impossible piece? Maya nodded. Do you remember what you told us afterward? You said the music tells you where to go, that it just makes sense to you. He paused, making sure she was listening. Has that changed? Does music still speak to you the way it did then? Yes, Maya said. Always. Then you're exactly as good as you need to be. Everything else, all the labels and expectations and pressure, that's not about you. That's about what other people want from you. But the music, that's yours. That's always been yours. So go out there and play for yourself, not for them. Maya walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage that night and played one of the most technically difficult programs of her young career. Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, and at the end, a contemporary piece by a living composer who'd written it specifically for her. It was challenging and beautiful and strange, and Maya played it like she'd known it her whole life. The standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes. Reviews called it transcendent and a defining moment in classical music. But what Maya remembered most was the feeling of the music moving through her, the sense of being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Years passed. Maya kept growing, kept learning, kept playing. At 15, she was considered one of the most technically gifted pianists of her generation. At 18, she'd performed on every major continent and worked with the world's finest orchestras. At 20, she was invited to teach masterclasses to students twice her age. But the thing that never changed, through all the success and recognition and inevitable challenges that came with being in the public eye so young, was her relationship with music itself. It remained the one constant, the one thing that never demanded anything she couldn't give, the one place where she could always be completely herself. Professor Hartman passed away when Maya was 22. At his funeral, she played a piece he'd loved, a simple Schubert impromptu that required more feeling than technical skill. She cried while she played, something she'd never done in a performance before. But it felt right. It felt honest. It felt like the best way to say goodbye to the man who'd protected her gift, while also protecting her humanity. In the memorial program, Maya wrote a tribute. In it, she talked about that first audition, about walking into that grand hall as a nervous 8-year-old with a cheap keyboard and a dream she didn't even know she had. She talked about how Professor Hartman had given her more than just music education. He'd given her permission to be extraordinary without losing herself in the process. He never forgot, she wrote, that before I was a prodigy, before I was a performer, before I was any of the things people called me, I was just a kid who loved to play piano, and he made sure I never forgot it either. Today, Maya Chen is in her 30s. She still performs, though more selectively now. She teaches at the Vienna Academy of Music, the same institution where she once auditioned. She works with young students, especially those from families who can't afford traditional lessons, offering scholarships and mentorship to kids who remind her of herself. Sometimes, when she's teaching, she tells her students about that audition, about the piece the judges couldn't play, about the 3 seconds that changed her life. But the lesson she tries to impart isn't about being a prodigy or having a gift or being special. The music is always there, she tells them, whether anyone is listening or not. Whether you're performing at Carnegie Hall or playing in your bedroom, it's there. And if you love it, really love it, then you're already exactly where you need to be. Everything else is just details. And then she sits down at the piano and plays something beautiful, something that reminds everyone in the room why they fell in love with music in the first place. Because that's what Maya Chen does. That's what she's always done. She takes something impossibly complex and makes it sound simple. She takes something simple and makes it sound profound. She plays, and the world listens, and for a few minutes everything makes sense. That 8-year-old girl who walked into an audition hall all those years ago didn't know what her future would hold. She didn't know about the concerts or the albums or the recognition. She just knew she loved music, and that was enough. It turned out it was more than enough. It was everything.